big thing of moss off the Costa Rican floor and tore it apart and found this guy, right? And put him on this other moss mat and took its picture. They totally unmossed it from its native habitat. And so it's actually living most of its life in these moss mats. It has an active range that its internal temperature needs to be a whole 1 degree Celsius active range. If it's higher or lower than that, it doesn't function as well. And so these moss mats are acting as that regulatory, the temperature regulation for it. It lives its whole life within these moss mats. We think about nesting, obviously, our minds go to birds. And moss is a definite component of nesting material. So there was a study of 12 East Coast bird nests. So they took these, again, they like to pull things apart. So they took these 12 bird nests and pulled them apart and arranged all the mosses on the table, identified them. There were 65 different species of mosses in these 12 birds' nests. So it's a very important component of the birds' nesting materials. Okay, this is the little spotted frog that we talked about. This picture is just adorable. Had to put it in there. So this is an endangered species of spotted turtles. It lives in peatlands. It doesn't like nest within the peatland, but like the moss forms this mat, and they kind of burrow underneath it and find hollows underneath the moss and are kind of nesting in the soil under there. But this moss forms a blanket over this wetland. And so in the winter, when it's minus 35 out in the air, it's only minus 2 down below. And this is how they overwinter in such harsh environments. One more. The guy just makes me laugh. Sorry. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. So this is a mossy frog. That's its name, mossy frog. It's occurring in some tropical forest. When I was searching on the internet for a mossy log. So I type in Google mossy log, and this guy pops up as a mossy frog because they thought I was joking. Mossy log. Who wants a picture of that? So this is a mossy frog, but it has. Oops, sorry. Coming back. Oh, coming back. So on its bean, it has these different lighter colored spots and all these little bumps on it that are mimicking the moss that it's living in. So it's total camouflaged in its environment, which is helping to keep it safe. So then we have this food and the food locations. Are bryophytes good to eat? Not really. They have a lot of lignin and a lot of cell structure and things that are put in herbariums. They don't need mothballs because nothing comes in to eat them. They're not very digestible. But there are some exceptions to that rule, of course. So you can see this is a species Eulogophyllantha. And all of these are supposed to be like full, fat, oval type leaves. And you see all these just, little streams. That's the midrib of the leaf that's left, and everything else has been eaten. So they think that isopods were eating this guy. And so we talked about Gemmy earlier. So here's Gemmy on this Orthotrichum lyalii. These are they're pretty tender. So they're not old and crusty like the leaf. They're pretty young and tender. Those are pretty good to eat. So little creatures will eat those. And they also think that by the creatures eating these, that helps in their dispersal, because the little creature will take it off to eat it in private, apparently. And then moss capsules are pretty nutritious and tender as well. So this part up here. So like I know around here, slugs and mice will eat the capsules. That species that I showed you earlier, bug on a stick, with just the capsule up there, it's really hard to find those because I think the slugs and the rodents go along and eat them on the logs, and so they're pretty hard to find. But this species also, Brachythecium retabulum, is a major component of weevil diets in the Arctic, and they're eating the whole plant. They're not just focused on the capsules. So some organisms are able to digest them. Bryophytes, this food thing, things that do ingest them, they create and collect chemicals that are in the atmosphere. So this little guy, this is a lemming in the Arctic. It'll eat mosses in the Arctic environment, and these mosses naturally have in them high levels of arachidonic acid. Never heard of that before, but here we go. So this acid has a melting point of 49 degrees below freezing. So it stays liquid till it's really, really cold. And as the creatures are eating this, they're incorporating that acid into their bodies, and they actually think that this is helping the rodents to keep their feet pads from freezing. So that's pretty interesting. But these little guys were a part of the Chernobyl accident. As all of that radiation was put out into the atmosphere, the bryophytes collected it all, and these guys ate them, and that radiation got into the food chain that way. So it can be good and bad, right?